The Old Testament reading is Deuteronomy 3:23 to 28. It was also at the same time that I begged the Lord, please, Lord God, you have only begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. What God in heaven or on earth can act as you do, or can perform your deeds and powerful acts? Please let me cross over the Jordan River so I can see the wonderful land that lies beyond it and those beautiful highlands, even the Lebanon region. But the Lord was angry with me because of you. He wouldn't listen to me. He said to me, that's enough from you. Don't ever ask me about this again. Go up to the top of Mount Pisgah. Look west, north, south, and east. Have a good look, but you will not cross the Jordan River. Instead, command Joshua, strengthen him, and encourage him, because he's the one who will cross the river before his people. He's the one who will make sure they inherit the land you will see. The New Testament reading is from John 15, 1 through 8. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vineyard keeper. He removes any of my branches that don't produce fruit, and he trims any branch that produces fruit so that it will produce even more fruit. You are already trimmed because of the word that I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. A branch can't produce fruit by itself, but must remain in the vine. Likewise, you can't produce fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, then you will produce much fruit. Without me, you can't do anything. If you don't remain in me, you will be like a branch that is thrown out and dried up. Those branches are gathered up, thrown into a fire, and burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified when you produce much fruit, and in this way, prove that you are my disciples.
We've been following Moses over the last few weeks as he wandered beyond the wilderness and was awed by the burning bush, as he led the Israelites on their journey through the desert, and as they stood at the edge of the Red Sea, ready and waiting to step forward boldly in faith. Today, our reading from Deuteronomy brings us close to the end of the story of Moses. In these first 3 chapters of Deuteronomy, Moses is retelling to the Israelites the story of how they came to be where they are, and where they are is the valley of Beth Peor, situated to cross the Jordan River and enter the land that has been promised by God. I wonder how it might have felt for Moses, pleading with God to have the opportunity to experience what the promised land might be like, the place to which he had been traveling and working towards for a very long time, and how that might have felt to be told by God, no, you will not go into the land that I have promised, but you can come up to the top of the mountain and look at it. Connected with the Israelite people with whom Moses had maintained solidarity, he, like many of his followers, will not be included in the group that will pass through the river into the new land. This episode brought to mind a story I had read a while back in Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak. Palmer described a time in his life that he was unclear the next direction to go vocationally. He was in a temporary position and needed to discern next steps, but it was not clear. As a member of the Quaker community, or the Society of Friends, Palmer had been taught to look for way opening. Many times our decision-making processes involve feeling that we have to shake things up. We have to make things happen. We must create change for ourselves, make our own way in the world. The Quaker understanding of way, however, views our movement through life and discernment processes a little differently. Instead of decisions being propelled forward by our own actions, way opening involves taking time to allow next steps to become clear, opportunities to evolve. We might sense that something is on the horizon, but instead of human-driven pushes to move into the next phase, whatever that might be, way opening provides for the Spirit to open the way ahead of us so we can find clarity to move forward gently. Often this happens unexpectedly through paths that we might not have been inclined to pursue. As Parker Palmer writes about his experience, he was becoming concerned. Way did not seem to be opening. Things were not becoming clear. He did not know what his next vocational step should be. Palmer writes, "After a few months of deepening frustration, I took my troubles to an old Quaker woman well known for her thoughtfulness and candor. 'Ruth,' I said, 'people keep telling me that way will open. Well, I sit in the silence, I pray, I listen for my calling, but way is not opening. I've been trying to find my vocation for a long time, and I still don't have the foggiest idea of what I meant to do. Way may open for other people, but it's sure not opening for me.'" Ruth's reply was a model of Quaker plain speaking. "I'm a birthright friend," she said somberly, "and in 60-plus years of living, way has never opened in front of me." She paused, and I started sinking into despair. Was this wise woman telling me that the Quaker concept of God's guidance was a hoax? Then she spoke again, this time with a grin. "But a lot of way has closed behind me, and that's had the same guiding effect." Parker continues, "I laughed with her, laughed loud and long, the kind of laughter that comes when a simple truth exposes your heart for the needlessly neurotic mess it has become. Ruth's honesty gave me a new way to look at my vocational journey, and my experience has long since confirmed the lesson she taught me that day. There is as much guidance in what does not and cannot happen in my life as there is in what can and does, maybe more." Often the way forward is paved or clarified by the way that has closed, that to which we cannot return, that which we are not to pursue. Way closing might look like many things: the end of a job or an entire career, a relationship that comes to a close, part of the relationship or all of it, a medical diagnosis that permanently changes the way life can be lived, something that we have hoped for and planned for that simply cannot be for any number of reasons. Sometimes way closing is welcome. Other times it is not. Sometimes it is a direct and obvious result of our own actions, and sometimes it is completely out of our control. Sometimes there is a very good reason to believe that way is not totally closed or only partially closed, and sometimes we try to close way when it really ought to be left open. But when it is fully closed, we usually know it deep inside, even if we aren't ready to admit it to ourselves, and even if it will take conversation with wise mentors to discern this truth. There is often nothing good that feels good about this loss, this ending, this closed way. It is to be grieved. It is confusing and disorienting. And also, in retrospect, there is the promise of good that can emerge from that closed way, fruit that might have otherwise been lost, different or renewed timing or change that might not have otherwise come about. Perhaps when way closes, it brings us into more clear connection with God's call. It demands, perhaps, that we abide with Jesus in ways that we never would have otherwise, if not for the opportunity. I was drawn to the John 15 text about the vine and pruning the branches because it reminded me of this idea of way closing. There is a time for some things to end, some things to be trimmed away. To me, this illustration of the vine is ripe, pun intended, because it is only when the vine is pruned of dead branches, pieces that are not producing fruit, that the vine can strengthen to better develop good new fruit. Perhaps most surprising is that even the vines that flower and produce fruit must be pruned, because after pruning, the quality of the fruit increases. The vine can grow stronger branches and better fruit when it isn't redirecting energy to dead growth and fruit that is just okay. I think the imagery of pruning might suggest something similar to way being closed. Something has ended, the branch has been pruned, a door has closed, a particular path is no longer an option. That way is definitely not the way. The way to flower and fruit is not on that branch. But flower and fruit can and will still be. Pruning not only allows the best fruit to develop more fully, but it strengthens the vine and the branches for the next season and to carry fruit that has not yet been revealed. I notice in the John 15 scripture that it is not our job to do the cutting. It is not our job to do the pruning. That is the work of the sacred vine grower. This is not to say that we should abide in situations or relationships that are unethical or unsafe. But it is our job to be open to God's pruning. And just because God is the vine grower, that doesn't mean that we wander about in life with no control over our circumstances. We, and by we, I mean my read on this community of faith and also the larger Church of the Brethren theological blend, we don't tend to lean into a Calvinist perspective of God's determinism and predestination, an understanding that God has scripted out everything that happens in our life, taking away any human involvement, meaning that everything that happens is God's will, the good, the bad, and the ugly, including whether or not we are predestined to end up in heaven or hell. I don't claim to have some special knowledge of whether that is ultimately right or wrong, but it doesn't match my sense of God's desire to work in and through community, through humanity, each of us as the hands and feet of Christ's love and service. We also don't lean into a deist understanding that God created the world and then said, "See ya," leaving humanity to its own devices, and that God has no involvement in our lives, that human reason is the only way of the world, not divine intervention. As is so often the case, the truth, I suspect, lands somewhere in the middle. I appreciate the way United Methodist pastor Adam Hamilton put it in his book, Half-Truths. God helps those who help themselves and other things the Bible doesn't say. Hamilton writes, "Between the micromanaging God who causes everything to happen and the absentee landlord God who is not involved in our lives is a picture of God who grants human beings freedom and allows them to take risks. It is a picture of God who does not cause tragedy, but uses it. Of God who can directly and supernaturally intervene, but usually works indirectly through people. It is a picture of God who, through the power of Jesus' resurrection, gives us assurance that in the end, death has been swallowed up by a victory, as we read in 1 Corinthians 15:54. So this takes me back to the Quaker understanding of waiting for way to open. And the question then becomes, what is ours to do, and what is God's to do, and what might be ours to do together? And so we are talking about abiding with God, immersed in the true love of God, the love that bears beautiful and tasty and juicy fruit like Paul describes in Galatians 5. And I'm going to read them in reverse order because I think sometimes reading things in fresh ways helps us hear the words as if they are new. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, kindness, forbearance, peace, joy, and love. Always we end up at love. Every time I start feeling like maybe we overuse that one, I'm reminded that it is literally all over the Bible, all over, woven in both to that which we are to be and that which we are to receive, overflowing as the sweet juices of the fruit warmed by the sunshine on the vine, nourished by the fragrant, soaking rain, sacred fruit that we are offered, and fruit which we have to offer to others. And so when I return to the image of Moses, I admit I feel a little sad. Here is a guy who has worked really hard to follow God's instructions, lead these people through challenging episodes, and he gets to the end of the road and asks God one more time, please, might I be able to see and go on across the Jordan into the land you have promised? And God says, you may not go, but you may see. And you can go up to the top of the mountain and look at it. Look at the land that is for the people. I think of times that I have had in my head a plan for what was to be, a place that I thought I was going, a direction that seemed to be have all the goodness that I had hoped for, a goal that I had worked for, a beautiful vision of what could happen, only to discern, perhaps a little less clearly than God's no to Moses, that it was not where I was actually headed. That way was closed. I'm not sure I can ever fully understand or claim to understand why, but in retrospect, looking back at those kinds of situations that did not end up as I had anticipated, now I can see the good that worked through them. Hope can emerge from catching a glimpse of the beauty of that which was not to be. Perhaps, as was the case for Moses, that experience was better suited for someone else. Had things panned out the way I had once hoped or anticipated, I wouldn't have ended up in some of the most fruitful experiences of my life. And Moses' job is not done. He's not being fired. In fact, he has a tremendous role yet to fill as he continues through the entirety of the book of Deuteronomy, 31 more chapters, to instruct and direct the Israelite people as they prepare for the next phase of their journey. That view of the land across the Jordan, I think, maybe gives Moses the hope he needs to fulfill his calling to rescue the Israelites, whom he has led out of Egypt. This view of the land that he will not enter gives Moses the promise he needs to pass along to this next generation that will continue to carry faithfulness of and to God. This view gives Moses the hope he requires in order to empower and guide Joshua, the next leader. This view strengthens Moses' branch, giving him renewed energy to bear more fruit, both in his own remaining days and in that of the lives of the community and leaders with which he is connected. And interestingly, Moses will definitely be in this new land, perhaps not physically, but in the memories and hearts of those he has led and loved along the way. The branches are always connected through the vine, and the vine is nourished and grounded by the roots, and this is where hope and love are continually found. Like leading a group of people on a long journey through unfamiliar territory to a new and not yet seen future, pruning in a vineyard is difficult work, and the fruits are not immediately born. It can be the next year or even longer before the pruning yields truly excellent crops. But it is worthwhile in the end. The struggle and the stretching, the working things through, and the giving up of that which turns out not to be the best for us. Through it all, Jesus invites us to abide with him, abide in his word, abide in his love. And we are united by the vine of community, the assurance that we belong with each other, whether we have been part of this congregation since we were born, or from the moment we walked in the door or joined the live stream this morning. We are united on the vine that binds us, strengthens us, bears our fruit, rooted in God's love and Jesus' way. May it be so.